Nessa edição especial do Conta Corrente, você vai assistir a uma entrevista especial com o escritor e jornalista americano Thomas Stewart. Ele mora em Nova York e é do conselho editorial da revista Fortune e veio ao Brasil para um seminário fechado da IBM. Essa é a única entrevista que Thomas Stewart já deu à televisão brasileira. Thomas Stewart é autor deste livro Capital Intelectual, que provocou uma verdadeira revolução nas empresas de todo o mundo. Neste livro, ele fala sobre a era do novo milênio, a era da inteligência, do conhecimento, onde a maior riqueza das empresas não está nos seus equipamentos, na matéria-prima, no dinheiro, e sim na capacidade intelectual, nos neurônios, na inteligência dos seus executivos, dos seus empregados. Esse é que será o grande diferencial em um mundo globalizado de altíssima competição. A inteligência, o intelecto. Essa entrevista de Thomas Stewart é um alerta. Mais do que nunca, é preciso estudar, se aperfeiçoar para poder crescer, sobreviver nesse mundo novo. Veja a entrevista.
Well, you begin your book saying that intelligence and knowledge are the thermonuclear weapons of our time. And they are more valuable than natural resources, industries, money accounts. And that intelligence, knowledge, information are the intellectual capital on which is based your new concept, your revolutionary new concept. Mm-hmm. Well, what is this intellectual capital?
When it was about 7 or 8, 9 years ago, I heard people talking about the knowledge economy, talking about an information revolution. And I didn't understand what they meant. And to me it sounded good, but I didn't feel it. I didn't really understand it. And so I started asking sort of a journalist's question. Where's the money? And I started by looking at the things that people buy and sell. And I started looking at those things and trying to figure out how much knowledge was in the things that people bought and sold. And so you examine something, you take something like my book, you know. When people buy my book, are they buying the paper? No, they're buying the words on the page, right? Mm-hmm. They're buying, they hope, the knowledge in the book. The paper itself is worth a few cents. Mm-hmm. The book, of course, is worth a fortune, but they're really buying the knowledge. When people buy an automobile, what are they buying? If you take a look at an automobile and start looking at the costs in an automobile, the electronics in an automobile cost more than the steel. Mm-hmm. If you try to, automobiles have more microchips in them than they have spark plugs. There's much more knowledge in a car today than in a car that was built 50 years ago. There's more knowledge in the car. The cliche example of this is a computer. Mm-hmm. You know, your small computer today has more knowledge, more intellectual power than a computer that used to be huge, that used to be larger than this studio. So it has a much higher ratio of, much higher proportion of knowledge to physical stuff. Then you start looking at questions of price. Yeah. It's another, price represents economic power, the power to set price. The power of commodities, oil, food, certain minerals. Since 1950, the power of commodities has fallen 30% compared to the price of manufactured goods. Mm-hmm. So commodity prices are going down. Manufactured goods have stayed roughly here, and the price of services, which tend to be knowledge, have gone up 3 times. So pricing power has moved from natural resources to information and knowledge. And then from this you can conclude that the assets that are most important for companies, the assets that are most important for economies and nations are their knowledge assets, their intellectual capital rather than their physical assets. The things you know that people are willing to pay for, the things that you can use that can change knowledge, can change information and make it more valuable so that you can sell it for that higher price that a good service
And how can a
command.
company convert intellectual capital into wealth, into profit?
Well, I would argue that intellectual capital is wealth. It is what creates wealth. Mm-hmm. Think about, the important thing to recognize about capital is this. Capital is, a capital capital is something that changes something, right? You have raw materials that come in to a capital asset, it does something to it, and then something more valuable comes out, all right? I work at a magazine. I work for Fortune magazine. Our raw materials are what? Our raw materials are facts, interviews. Caffeine is one of the most important raw materials of Fortune magazine. Caffeine is an important raw material for you. Those are our raw materials. Our job is to change them into stories, to add thinking, to bring information from many different sources, put them together into a subject, make it entertaining, put good pictures around it, make it more interesting, make it accessible to readers, and help them understand the world. Our intellectual capital is the process of creating that understanding in our stories.
And how can a company stimulate the improvement of the intellectual human capital?
There are lots of ways of doing it. The most important thing that a company has to recognize is that its people are important and have ideas, right? In fact, we have to start thinking much more carefully about this because some people are not assets. Some people are costs. And some people are not only costs, but they're grumpy, unhappy costs, right? So we can't be sentimental about this. This is not to say they're bad people. This is not to say they're stupid people. They could be very intelligent people. There has to be a match between the knowledge of the individual, the skills of the individual, and the needs of the corporation and what the company is selling.
Yes, you said that market is very unmerciful, that rewards wherever creates value and punishes wherever does not. And I'm going to reproduce here your words. Very interesting, really. The invisible hand is unseen as well as unseen. It simply moves and moves on, neither knowing nor caring whether it has delivered a pat on the back or a blow to the jaw. Tell me, isn't that a cruel sense of justice?
It is. That doesn't make it any the less true. When the Iron Curtain went down in Eastern Europe, a terrible thing happened to the citizens of Eastern Europe. They discovered that they didn't have jobs. They actually never had jobs. They had phony jobs. They were producing things. I mean, basically all of Eastern Europe was unemployed. They just hadn't been. They were still being paid, but they had no real jobs. One of the wonderful things about markets is that they eventually start to work in a productive way, because the devil finds work for idle hands. I don't know if you have that expression in Brazil. We have that expression in the United States. The devil finds work for idle hands. If somebody's not doing anything, they'll get to work. You know, the devil will find a job for them if nobody else will find a job for you. And let's think about this, for example, in the largest historical terms. If you go back to the beginning of the Industrial Revolution in Britain, the Industrial Revolution began in the textile businesses, in clothing, wool, and cotton. At that time, in the late 18th century, in the early 19th century, all of the technology for the Industrial Revolution also existed in India. It was there. It was possible. The power loom was there. Everything was available. The Indians did not use it. The Indians did not use it because labor was very cheap. So machines it wasn't worth buying the money for the machines. In England, labor was more expensive, so it was worth buying the money for the machines. The problem was that the Indians fell permanently behind. At the time, it seemed like the right decision. People are cheap, why should we replace them with machines? It was the right decision in the short run. But in the long run, India lost even the clothing business that it had because the automation took away those jobs, even though those jobs were very low-paying jobs. So it never is in your long-run advantage to fall behind technology. Eventually, the technology continues to improve. The only job security is to have the highest value jobs you can, and that ultimately creates the most jobs. Right now in Brazil, in all emerging markets, you have this question of a trade-off. Do we keep people employed, or do we get the most efficient possible companies? I have to argue you go for the most efficient possible companies, because in the long run you won't keep the people
There's no
employed.
way, no other way.
Yeah,
So if
and new companies.
If intelligence is the main power now, right now, therefore,
Education is the most important instrument of the development of
a society, right? Is that correct?
I would say education, but I wouldn't necessarily say schools.
Do you think that the schools, they are not able to prepare people for this new era, this information era?
All right, I feel very hesitant about talking about the Brazilian education system because I don't know anything about the Brazilian education system.
You have an idea.
I've been in Brazil for 24 hours. Don't know. So please, I'm sure that what I will say will be in many cases,
You can talk
in
about
many
American
cases
education
incorrect.
anyway.
But I can talk about American education because I know how terrible it is, because it's not as good as it was when I was growing up. But first of all, it needs to be universal. We need to get as many people educated to a decent level of being able to read and write and do arithmetic as we possibly can. Right? Second, we need to teach people how to learn. It is the most important thing that we can teach people, is to teach people how to learn and to love learning.
What's the right way to learn?
Oh, I don't think there's any one right way to learn. But we need to teach people to love to learn. We need to teach people that learning can be fun. We need to teach people that by learning they will increase the value, their enjoyment of life, and increase their economic enjoyment of life. You know, in every country in the world, the income gap between people with a good education and people with a low education, that gap is widening. In absolutely every country in the world, we need to show people that. People will learn if they can see the economic value of learning. We then need to make it possible for people to continue to learn. And that means that we need to have opportunities for learning that aren't just in school. We need to have opportunities for learning that are in companies. We need to have a management style that encourages learning. And it needs to be part of the culture of our companies. If you make a mistake, should your boss come to you and say, you made a mistake, you're fired? Or should your boss come to you and say, tell me the story of the mistake that you made? Why did you make that? What were you thinking? What did you know? What facts did you base that decision on? What was in your mind? What did you think about? If you go into a factory where you have maybe it's an old-fashioned factory and the boss says, I don't want you to think, just do what I tell you, right? That same person goes home and takes apart an automobile and puts it back together. Goes home and goes to his church and sings in the choir. Or goes home and goes to his church and runs the finances for his church. That same person who the boss thinks can only turn a screw like this is actually capable of building a whole house, and probably has. People have a lot more intelligence at home often than they do in their workplaces. And if the boss is smart, he'll recognize this is important, and he must, because of the change in what we buy and sell, which means the boss has to be coordinating a group of people who are experts. I have a button that I sometimes wear. It says, smarter than my boss. I sometimes wear it around my boss.
But
but that's increasingly the case. It used to be that you became the boss because you were smarter. I know more, so I'm the boss. Because I am the boss, I know more. I'm the boss, that proves I know more. Now, increasingly, the boss is coordinating people who are experts. I have a software writer. I have a graphic artist. I have an accountant. I'm coordinating the work of people who, in fact, are experts. And my job as the boss is to get them to deliver their expertise. My job is not to know more than they do. My job is to get them to work together, to pool their knowledge.
do you think really that the bosses are prepared for this
Some are,
revolution?
some are and some aren't. It's sometimes very difficult. Some people do not want to let go of the power that comes with being the boss.
And the companies, they should be less stratified, do you think so?
Yes, they need to be less stratified. Traditionally, information has moved up the hierarchy, over and down, right? If I have a problem, I have to go to my boss, who goes to her boss, who goes to his boss, who then goes over here, and somewhere the question gets down here to the person who can solve my problem, right? By the time that information has gone up and down like that, it's taken a long time. Takes a week, takes more. It's been filtered. It's been politicized. Politics enter in. Maybe it's been destroyed. And so by the time the message gets over here, it's changed, right?
That's right.
It has changed. Now, if what I'm selling is information, I can't afford for that to happen. It's got to move directly. If I have a problem, I need to be able to go directly to the source of the answer to that problem, because I'm selling this to a customer. There's somebody out here with money who wants to pay for the answer, and I don't have time for it to go through channels like this. It's got to be much more efficient, and the role of the executive and of the boss has to be one of helping that to happen, rather than one of delaying, filtering, and politicizing.
Information, it seems to me, is the main product right now. Information and time. What about time?
That's a good point. We all know that the world seems to be speeding up, going faster and faster and faster. And half the time we wish it would slow down, right? I mean, future shock is upon us. Why can't things slow down? And I'll tell you why things can't slow down. The problem is that the information age is not only fast, it's structurally fast. It is permanently fast. The money determines the clock. If you think about an era of agriculture when the most valuable thing was the produce of farms, then economic time was climatological time. It was agricultural time. It moved with the sun through the passage of the seasons. It moved with slow changes in fertility. And things tended to, the pace of society was built around agriculture. In the United States, the pace of our schools is built around agriculture. We have a 3-month-long summer vacation because people needed to work on the farm. The economy starts moving up, speeding up. It moves with the speed of manufactured goods, which means it starts to move with the speed of transportation. 300 years before that, it took 80 days to get from one end of the Mediterranean Sea to the other. Right? So the world began to speed up. As you moved to steamships, you could get around the world in 80 days. Now you can get around the world in how many hours? About 40 hours probably it would take to go around the world. Things move fast, but things you can move.
Be online with the whole world.
Now you move to an age of knowledge. And when the things we buy and sell can be expressed in ones and zeros, they can go around the world in a second. They go at the speed of light. And everything tends to speed up to the speed of light. Now, you could have 5 people in Rio de Janeiro. They could start a company and they could make their first sale to Tokyo and their second sale to Frankfurt. And by the same token, there could be 5 people in Frankfurt who could come into Rio de Janeiro and they could make their first sale here. You can go global overnight. You need a distribution system. It's called the internet. It's right there.
It's a new planet.
It's a new planet. It's very fast. It's plug and play. It's modular. It's virtual. Think about the volatility that is implied in that. You look at a company like Netscape, okay? Netscape did not exist 5 years ago. 2 years after that, Netscape was worth $2 billion. 1 year after that, Netscape was worth $1 billion. The tremendous coming together and creating of value almost overnight. Time is of the essence. Now let's take it to management. You're a bank. We were talking about this earlier. You have a client in Venezuela. It needs a package of financial services. It needs it now. You have to bring together somebody who knows Spanish, somebody who knows Venezuela, somebody who knows the oil industry, somebody who knows credit risk analysis, somebody who knows derivatives, and somebody who knows currency markets. You need to bring them together right now, today, to make a deal for this client by 3 o'clock this afternoon. Why? Because if you don't do it, another bank will. And if they don't do it, another bank will. So you have to have, when knowledge is your product, time is very, very important. Time is a very important weapon because the knowledge is the most important thing of what we buy and sell. And so we have to be able to bring this stuff as quickly, to bring this stuff together as fast as knowledge moves. And knowledge moves like that.
You're talking about intelligence and knowledge, and let me ask you something. Are we accomplishing the prediction of Aldous Huxley in his book, The Brave New World, that society is going to be divided in castes. Privileged one that dominates intelligence, and the others that are servicing it.
Mm-hmm. First of all, I hope not. That's the short answer.
It's a cruel scenario.
It's a cruel scenario, and you can make the argument that it would happen. I hope it won't be true, and I believe it won't be true. We're at the beginning of this process, and we've been through it before. If you look at the history of the Industrial Revolution, it was a history of tremendous pain. One of the first consequences of Industrial Revolution was the mechanization of agriculture. People lost their jobs on the farms. They came into cities. They had no work. That's an old Industrial Revolution story that happened in France and it happened in England. They came into the cities. Eventually, a middle class started forming. Eventually, more wealth was created. And it's a good thing. It is a good thing that we only need 2% of the world's population to provide our food. That is a good thing. In the long run, it is good that we can feed the world with fewer people, because it allows us to do the things that make us most human. The things that make us most human are reading and art and culture.
So in this new era, we are going to have more time for enjoyment, for...
I don't think it's necessary. Well, yes. It's odd we talk about, if you
those
listen,
who are in the process, because there are many people, let's say, that they have no knowledge, they have no intelligence, and they have no way to obtain it.
I don't believe...
What's reserved for them in the future?
What we can hope to have, and I think are seeing signs of having, is the emergence of an economy that will provide opportunity for those people to develop their talents, to learn, to become better educated. It is going to be very painful. If you look back again at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, this led to revolution, and it was terrible.
Yeah.
In the long run, it was good. In the long run, it created more wealth. But we will go through some difficult transitions. Economic transitions are difficult. They are painful. Throughout the world, it's going to be difficult. And we can simply hope that we are several things. First, that we are hopeful, that we are optimistic. Second, that we are not greedy. One of the things that I think is interesting in developing economies, from what little I've seen of them, people tend to talk about, when you talk about wealth, you tend to talk about wealthy individuals. Rather than about wealthy companies or wealthy societies. You tend to talk about the wealth that is extracted rather than the wealth that is created. I don't know Brazil well enough to know whether the conversation about wealth in Brazil is about wealthy people. Oh, he's rich. Or whether it is about wealth that is created. Oh, this is a wealthy neighborhood. This is a wealthy company. This is a wealthy section of the economy.
We have a long way in Brazil.
I have a feeling that you probably tend to talk more about wealth as being something that is extracted, something that is exploited, something that is taken, rather than wealth as about something that is created. And that's going to be an index of the growth, of the development of the economy, is whether you start talking about the wealth that you create together, whether you start talking about investment as well as cashing out. Capital flight is an old story in Latin America, right? What happens, what you want is you want all of that capital, the capital that left this continent, if it could come back. If you brought, you talk about the question, there are arguments about how open Brazil should be to foreign investment. A lot of that investment, baby, is your own money coming back in, right? If you could make Brazil an attractive place to invest in, you wouldn't need foreign direct investment. You would be creating your own investment, and that's the kind of climate that you need. The villains of capitalism are to be found at home as well as abroad, and you want to create an environment that wealth finds attractive, where I can become wealthy, you can become wealthy, where we can become wealthy together. Because ultimately, that's what it's about. Ultimately, it is not possible to become rich by exploiting your fellows. You become rich by enriching other people.
Thank you very, very much.
Well, thank you very much.
Very interesting.
Thank you very much.
Okay.